On today's show,
And some of the thieves had interesting little enterprises going before we caught them.
this podcast is recommended for listeners over the age of 18 years. It contains content that some may find distressing, including but not limited to themes of death, abuse, violence, murder, self-harm and missing persons.
Welcome to What Are We Looking At? A podcast about the true crime cases of retired Detective Valentine Smith. I'm Private Investigator Samantha Kiss. Like and subscribe to our channel for exclusive content. Welcome back, listeners, to episode 6 of What Are We Looking At? All right, Val, come on, tell us all about these enterprise thieves.
Well, colour TVs are all the go. You know, in the 1970s, there was a bit of a building boom on, and building materials weren't the only thing that was being stolen at warp speed. During the late 1970s and early 80s, colour televisions were also in high demand. And I suppose as colour TVs became popular, everybody wanted them, so they just became a popular item to steal. And at first, it was any kind of colour television set as the public sort of embraced the technology. Then quickly it switched to portable TVs and second sets, as everybody wanted a second set for their family room or a bedroom or a study. And with the heroin epidemic reaching plague proportions or concerns, stolen colour televisions could be quickly converted via cash into the hideous drug. And some of the thieves had interesting little enterprises going before we caught them. And one pair of villains, which I spoke about in a previous episode, were dressing up in expensive stolen suits and driving around in a hired, dud check procured prestigious car. They'd arrive at the big electrical goods retailers and quickly select 2 coloured television sets each time, one big one for the house and another one for the study. And they were the, I'll take them with me, can you load them in my car outside deals? And of course, the quick to sell sales managers would only hesitate on the issue of check clearance for a second. They'd look at the suits and the car and think, they'll be fine. One of the best little villains in this stolen trade was a guy we'll call Sonny. And the way Sonny came unstuck was interesting. This hard-working, salt-of-the-earth Croatian guy came to see me regarding a burglary at his house where his rather expensive Nord Mendy brand television set was stolen. And this Croatian family were really good people. They lived a modest life, but of an evening they enjoyed sitting around the television to drift off into the fantasy world of celebrities and TV stars. And when the house was burgled and his television stolen, he was devastated. He was uninsured and he couldn't afford to replace it. His case was one of hundreds, and without a lead, you wouldn't give it a second thought other than to ensure that it was recorded properly just in case. Anyway, after about a week after the burglary, the Croatian came back to see me and told me that he'd been asking around the area about buying another cheap television set to replace the one stolen. In some ways, he'd been doing our job, but we were just so inundated with crime, going from one job to the next. He'd been referred to seek out a man that sometimes hung around the local coffee shops and gambling dens. We wanted to make some progress on a housebreaking case, and both we and the Croatian were convinced that the television supplier was a thief or at least a receiver of stolen goods. He basically got us a good lead, which was fantastic. And the Croatian was more than keen to help us, so we set it all up for action. A few days later, the Croatian made contact with the man that he was referred to and placed his order for a replacement television set, a Nord Mendy, of course. A date was set for the transaction, and the man contacted the Croatian and told him to meet him at the shopping centre as the dealer didn't have a car of his own. Whilst under our surveillance, the Croatian met the man as prearranged. It was Sonny. Sonny jumped into the passenger seat of the Croatian's car and off they went with a couple of carloads of detectives on their trail. They turned into a residential area. And the Croatian, under instructions from Sonny, pulled into the driveway of a house. Apparently, Sonny had told our Croatian man that he had a television for sale. It wasn't a Nord Mendy, but it was very cheap and he could go home and get it, hence the need to arrive at the house. But here's the catch. The house wasn't Sonny, and neither was the television. It cased the house earlier for stealing and was merely filling the order. Out of the house came Sonny, carrying the stolen television, and into the back of the car it went. So a few hundred yards down the road, we pounced, just to make it look more coincidental. Croatian was working for us, so of course he pulled over in compliance to our siren, and Sonny quickly confessed to a dozen or so burglaries, which put an instant dent in the number of unsolved burglaries in our patch, so it was a great arrest. The Croatian was still without a television, but he'd done the right thing in assisting us. It helped us clear up a great swag of burglaries in the district. So I made some inquiries with a major assurance company and found out that, well, one was willing to donate a recovered television set that they'd paid out on to Croatian man. So they gifted one to him, which is fantastic. So you can see what Sonny was doing. He was casing out houses where there was television sets to steal. Then he was taking orders for televisions, finding someone that wanted to buy a television, then taking that person in their car to the place, stealing the television, taking it out, putting it into the unwitting person's car. So if anybody saw the car in the driveway, the only person they're seeing is the person that's receiving the television, who doesn't really know who Sonny is, other than he's just some guy that hangs around the shop. One of the cases that Sonny owned up to was one we were interested in. One where an elderly lady had come home from shopping, found a man sitting at our lounge room table reading a newspaper. And when the elderly lady who lived alone inquired as to what the man was doing, he said he was waiting for the owner of a motorbike that was advertised for sale to return. "Is it your son?" he said. The elderly woman gave him a gruff ticking off and told him to get the hell out of there before she called the police. Now, the man got on his knees and begged the old woman not to call the police, which he did. The man thanked her for her understanding, apologised and left. All was well with the old lady, who was happy with that, until the next day when the same man returned with a big bunch of flowers, which he gave to the elderly lady for not calling the police. And the man left in a taxi. But this time the lady did call the police because she thought the guy was quite odd and his actions disturbed her considerably. The man, of course, was Sonny, who was casually sitting reading the paper and waiting for a customer to turn up and unwittingly buy the elderly lady's television set. Sonny had he had a pretty good modus operandi, which is method of operation, but it would bring him unstuck quickly. He could act under a false name and disappear once the deal was done. That's how the way he's thinking. Because if the neighbours were watching, they would perhaps get the number plate of a car. You'd be caught in possession of stolen goods when the police turned up. The person would tell the police all about the guy and how he sold the television to them. The police would consider the whole story very unlikely until they started to hear more about them, but it'd get messy. Anyway, Sonny was put out of action due to the honest actions of the Croatian guy. But some members of the public were not as efficient at helping us solve crimes as the Croatian and the elderly lady was. One other woman I can recall was quite the opposite. We were conducting a standard initial crime response to a basic burglary, a jewellery and cameras and television and all the easily saleable items. It is what we call teeing crime. And basically it meant that we attended, took down a few details for our CIB job sheet, dusted for fingerprints, and most filed it as no suspects, unable to get to first base as far as further inquiries were concerned. We attended the basic burglary at the house, one of many that day. And at the house were the two occupants, a businessman and his wife. The businessman had come home to discover that they had been burgled, and his wife had been out for most of the afternoon. And I asked the standard questions without learning anything that might help identify the villains. I casually asked if either of the couple had seen any strange vehicles in the street lately. And the wife immediately responded by saying that there was a strange car in their driveway that very afternoon. And we were as bewildered as the husband, who became even more unamused when I asked the wife to explain. The woman casually told us that she had driven past her own house on her way from the bank back across town to a hairdressing appointment. She went on to explain that as she had driven past her house, she had seen a car she didn't recognise parked in her driveway under her vacant carport. The husband was quicker to continue the questioning than us. And he asked what she thought the occupants of the car might be doing parked in their carport.
Mm.
The wife replied that she didn't even give it another thought because she was more concerned with her hairdressing appointment. We were all a little bit surprised by the behaviour of the wife, but we at least thought that we would have a description of the suspect vehicle. When I asked the wife what sort of car it was and the colour, she told me it was one of those little cars that students drive, and she couldn't remember what colour it was. Further questioning on what a student's car was didn't help either. The best we could assume was that perhaps the villain's car was a small four-cylinder, but then again, who knows? I would have liked to have been a flea on the carpet when that couple was on their own and able to discuss the burglary without police present. Could have been a different story had she gone into her home to find out what that car and its occupants were doing in a house at that particular time. Mobile phones were not available. Could have been disastrous.
Mm. One would have thought that there were enough housewives or people in the homes around there that would have picked up on these types of actions of these men. This guy wasn't the only one that was behaving like this. Were there other people that were doing the same type of criminal activity in the same way?
I'm not aware of anyone doing it exactly the same way as Sonny.
Mm.
Offenders would just go to a house, break in, steal what was there very quickly and go.
And so were many of these cases solved, or how did it pan out?
No, many of them were not solved. In a previous episode, we speak about the dealer's squad, which I worked at in the 80s after my time at that suburban CIB area.
Mm.
The dealer's squad was different to working in a divisional CIB because in the dealer's squad, we solved a lot of burglaries, but in a different way. In the suburban detective offices, a crime is committed and the property is stolen. So you know where the crime is, we don't know where the property is.
Mm.
In the dealer's squad, we would recover what we know is stolen property. What we don't know is where the properties come from.
Mm.
So it was the other way around. We would find villains in possession of property suspected of being stolen.
Mm.
The job would then be to connect that property to a crime. So the dealers would actually recover a lot of stolen property, the dealer's squad.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting thing to note. And I should imagine it's not that way nowadays. I mean, in terms of finding the criminals before the activity and vice versa.
No.
Things have changed quite dramatically with the invention of CCTV, particularly since they're on the front of pretty much everyone's home nowadays. And also the invention of mobile phones that are essentially a video camera in everyone's pocket. But cases do still remain unsolved. It does make me wonder, what are we missing? What could we have that would make a very big difference between solving a burglary and not?
To be honest, I don't know what the solvability rate is for burglaries these days. The protection of property in burglaries with CCTV, you're correct, it's a lot higher nowadays. We've got the added problem now with aggravated burglary on houses where the villains are breaking in and masking up, and regardless of whether there's CCTV or not, they're going in and still committing the crimes.
Mm.
Back then, there was a bigger market for stolen property as far as televisions were concerned and things like that. The markets for those sort of things is not there as much. As far as drugs are concerned, there's a lot of functioning drug users, so a lot of drug users in the community that are still functioning within the community.
Mm.
A lot of the criminals these days are user dealers.
Mm. What do you think about the reasons for burglary back then, or historically over the last sort of 5 decades? How do you think the reason for burglary has changed? Do you think that there actually is a change, or do you think fundamentally people still burgle for the same reasons? I understand that it always comes down to money, but do you think that there is more of an influence of payback nowadays? Because it seems to be that we're much richer now than we ever have been before. And so things like needing to burgle for a television, well, that wouldn't really be sold for that much money as a second-hand item nowadays as what it would have been back then. There would have been a lot more worth in doing it. So what would purpose be now for people to burgle, do you think?
Yeah, you're right. I think the need to burgle now is for the top end items. So they'd be really looking for large amounts of cash or expensive jewellery or access to expensive vehicles because people don't carry a lot of cash these days. So it'd be hard to find unless you know it's there. Whereas back then, that's what they could find. They could find cash.
So I suppose that the difference over the last several decades has been the change to digital burglary. That seems to now be the thing that people are after because, as you said, we don't really use cash at all anymore. And there aren't many common items that aren't within most people's reach of being able to afford at some point. People tend not to really collect antiques and things like that we historically have done. So I think that it's now turned into digital burglary of money, assets, but also identity.
Yeah, identity theft and certainly identity is used in order to get access to the digital wealth that people have. So it's the same thing.
Yeah.
If you or someone you know has found this content distressing and needs support, please contact Lifeline, Beyond Blue, or the Suicide Callback Service. For more information about who we are and what we do, please visit www.missingInAustralia.com.au. Till next time.